whisper, so it is nice and relaxing. And we're gonna kickstart this great weekend off. I decided to try something a little bit different for our first Friday back, and I picked this up at the store. It's called Don't Poke the Bear. And it is 100% Ontario apple cider, but it is alcohol. Like it's, I don't know, it's alcohol. I don't know. We're gonna give it a go. I've never had this before. I hope it's good. Oh, that wasn't too bad. Okay. I've got my little buggy bug mug. Okay, it just smells like apple juice so far. We're good, okay. Alright, that was a little rough, but I haven't done this in a little while, so forgive me. Cheers, my wonderful friends. I hope you have a drink or a snack, or get yourself cozy. That's weird. The very first thing I thought of was it tastes like the very first sip of beer you may have tried when you were younger. Like when your parents let you try one sip of beer. That's what came to mind there. It's good, it's refreshing. I just can't really taste the apples. It just really tastes like beer. But I like beer, so I'm fine with that. Okay, let's get into today's ghost story. And as usual, maybe the flavors will kind of like develop, you know. Alright, so today's story is definitely what I would describe as like a very classic ghost story. But of course, there's a terrifying twist, especially at the end. And I find it perfect for a Frightening Friday, and I hope you do as well. So, yeah, I hope you find it spooky but relaxing all at the same time. historical home with like original bricks and blue trim around the windows, and it had 2 stories with a basement, so it was large enough for their growing family, and it almost looked like, to me, a dollhouse. And of course, it was built before the turn of the century, so you would expect it to have like this really neat, old, warm, super cozy feeling from all the generations of families before that had lived in the house. Like, you know, that feeling you get when you walk into a really old home. I love that feeling of older houses. It's so cool. Like, I don't think I'm explaining it very well, but it's like you can almost literally feel the history and the energy in the air. It's really neat. And the Pickmans, they definitely experienced feelings of the previous tenants from over the years, but it wasn't in a warm and happy way. It was the opposite. But of course, at first, things weren't too bad. Like, the couple did notice small but unusual things, like the lights would be flickering on and off. Photos that they would take would sometimes have like weird dark orbs or shadows in them, like just dark masses that weren't there, that they knew weren't there when the photos were taken. They would sometimes feel cold spots when they would walk around the house. Lights would dim, TVs and stereos would turn on and off. But these were all things that they said, well, you know, the house is over 100 years old. Like, of course, there could be problems with the heating, electrical, etc., right? At first, what I mean is they didn't immediately jump to, oh, it must be a haunting. They tried to rationalize it, right? And just chalk it up to real life stuff. But one experience would be the one that would really cement the fact that something otherworldly was going on. One night, Tony and Deborah go into their baby's nursery, who had been born at that point, and they see that every single stuffed animal and toy had been removed from the shelves or elsewhere in the room where they had sat, and all of them were placed in the middle of the room in a perfect circle. Like, just stop and think about how creepy that is. Every single toy that the baby had was in the middle some crazy reason ghosts were actually real, he believed they were something that should be ignored. They shouldn't be messed with, and this was not something to be excited about. So the couple clean all of the stuffed animals and the toys up. They put them all back where everything belongs. They make sure to turn the light out in the nursery, and then they go back downstairs. And when they get to the bottom of the stairs, the light in the nursery flips back on. I don't know if the baby was in the room or not. I'm assuming not. They see the light on. They rush back up to see one lone stuffed animal is again sitting in the middle of the floor. It was an animal that they had put away back on the shelf, and there it was, like somebody had put it back on the floor. And now, even Deborah, both of them are actually a little bit freaked out because they're thinking, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's a living person, an intruder. Somebody might actually be in the house and messing with us. So Tony does an entire search of the house, but he doesn't find anybody. Yeah. So again, they put this teddy bear back in its place. They turn the lights out and they go downstairs. And I think, like, at least Deborah is just waiting and maybe wishing for something more to happen. Because remember, she's still excited about the idea of seeing a ghost. They wait for a little while, and then, sure enough, when they go back up to check the nursery, that same exact teddy bear that they had put back on the shelf for the second time is now sitting in the same place in the middle of the floor. And at this point, if this was me, I would be automatically thinking, ghost. This has to be a ghost. That is always my thought process whenever something spooky happens in the house. Like, it's a ghost. Or it's an alien. It's one or the other. But, yeah, if this was me, once that light switched on by itself again and the teddy bear ended up in the middle of the room, this is the point where I would say to Eric, we're not in Kansas anymore. We are clearly in, like, the 7th level of hell, and we need to get out now. Yeah, I say I love ghosts and stuff, and I do. But I think I like the idea more of a ghost. I think I would be super brave right up until the point something happened, and then I'd just be like, no, I take it back. I don't want to experience this. Yeah. And I'll leave the link to my ghost video. The 3 times I thought I did experience something paranormal. But again, those stories, those experiences were not something like, like a ghost wasn't right up in my face or something. I talk about it in the stories. Like, I admit it could have been just me making stuff up. It could have been my brain filling in gaps. It could have been tricks of the light. Yeah. Anyways, the Pigmans were apparently freaked out at this point too. Maybe seeing the inanimate object move for the 3rd time. Maybe this was enough for Deborah, because now she's a little bit scared as well. But I think what really is another reason why she's always in the nursery. And the psychic, she actually ends up warning the Pickmans not to leave the baby unattended, because even though Sally would never mean to harm the baby, you know, like any small child, she could do so accidentally. I would be out of there so fast if that was me. Like, I don't have children, but I can imagine how crazy I would be, like crazy protective I would be over my baby. And whether it is a real person or a ghost, I would be gone. But if you are not into the paranormal at this point in the story, you might be thinking like, this is complete BS, right? But if you're like me and you are into ghosts, you're probably thinking, wow, that's crazy. But whatever the case, whatever your beliefs, I think that the next thing that happened is undeniably creepy. It turns out that this psychic was not the first person to mention the name Sally. A different family had lived in this house. I think it was about 3 years before the Pickmans moved in, and this family had only lived there for about 8 months. This family had a little daughter, a 5-year-old daughter, and when they moved into the house that the Pickmans now owned, the little girl began having an imaginary friend. And I'll give you like one shot at guessing the name of her imaginary friend. Can you guess it? It was Sally. Yep. And this little girl's mother assumed, like any imaginary friend, Sally wasn't real. But any time that her daughter would get into trouble or just, you know, do something naughty, her mother would get upset with her, and then her daughter would say, like, Mom, no, it wasn't me, it was Sally. And the mom had no idea that she may have actually been telling the truth. And this was 3 years before the Pickmans moved in. So again, like, even though the situation is quite weird and Tony doesn't believe in this stuff, like nothing too serious has happened yet, and Deborah is still excited about the fact that something paranormal could be going on, and now it's even better knowing that this ghost is an adorable little girl who just wants to be around them, almost like she wants to be a part of their family. Yeah. And I just have to say, at this point, if this was me, I'm pretty sure, again, like, I would be acting all excited as well as completely believe in, like, the fact that this is a ghost. I would be certain that this was a ghost. And then I would be excited right up until the point that I actually experienced something ghostly. I have this idea that I want to experience a ghost, like, right up in my face, but I know myself too well, and if I ever do experience something like that, really starts kind of parenting the ghost. Like, the psychic told her, she's a little kid. You need to set some boundaries with her. If she does something bad again or makes a mess with the toys, you need to tell her that that is not acceptable. So Deborah starts doing this, and she starts buying her like little ghosts. No, she doesn't buy her a ghost. She buys her presents. Like, she'll leave her a doll and stuff like that. And all of this just creates an even stronger, like, maternal bond with her little ghost daughter. Yeah. Yeah. And after this, Deborah starts experiencing more paranormal activity the more she does this, like the closer she gets to her. swirling around, and he realized that these dust particles were forming into a woman, and she was wearing black lace, and I believe she had a bird on her shoulder, which is just super creepy. And she starts walking towards him with her hands outstretched, like she was about to start choking him. And then everything in the room started violently shaking, including the bed. And then just like that, when first day of shooting. It's terrifying, and the crew really cannot believe what they are seeing. One of the crew members of the show was a parapsychologist named Gary Gaynor, and during filming, during an interview with the Pickmans, he was sitting right next to Tony and experienced for himself these bloody scratches appearing on Tony. And he was sitting no more than a meter away from him while this was happening. And Gary had his eyes on him the entire time. The cameras were rolling the entire time. There was no trickery involved whatsoever. And during this interview, Tony would be continually attacked over and over for a total of 11 times. And this was just during one interview. He got 11 separate scratches on his back, arms, forehead, and abdomen that developed right in front of the crew. And after each scratch appeared, Gary and the crew would look at it, mark it down, and then reference it to make sure that any new scratches that developed later were actually new. Yeah. So Dr. Gaynor, he said that he had investigated about 850 cases at that point in his career, and in regards to the Sally house, he said, quote, "I have never come across anything like this." Yeah. And again, it's not believed that this could have been dermatographia because these cuts produced blood. At one point, they're walking around the house with another paranormal researcher and psychic named Peter James, when all of a sudden Tony begins feeling that familiar scratching pain on his back, and they come over to see what's happened, and it's not just a scratch on his back this time. Tony actually has initials scratched into his lower back. MC. Clear as day. MC. And can you guess what the crew discovered after doing a little digging? I bet you won't actually guess. Yeah. Hello. So in the early 1900s, a man had lived in this house named MC Finney. And from what everybody believes, from all the information available, MC Finney, the initials on Tony's back, this man had a big connection to Sally the ghost, and may have been the real reason behind Sally's hatred or fear of men, and therefore Tony. And before we jump into this, I need to talk about the psychic Peter James, because this is fascinating. So he was the show's resident psychic, and they wouldn't tell him anything beforehand. He would just show up and see what he could read about each filming location, situation, or house. And of course, you have to take that with a grain of salt, right? You just have to hope that he really wasn't given this information beforehand. But the show says that he did go into every situation or episode blind, the way most psychics work. So Peter James arrives at the house for filming the show, and pretty much immediately after he gets out of the car, he sees a little girl in the upper window of the house, and she's looking down at him. And he knows right away it's a spirit, that somebody who used to live here was in the medical fields. And remember the initials that were scratched into Tony's back? Well, MC may have been the initials for MC Finney again. And this was actually the man who had built this house. He had built it in 1871. He died only 1 year after, but he'd left behind 3 children. One of those children became a doctor. this is what they recorded. What do you think? So it's a very low level sound, like a very creepy low humming, and they ruled out any electrical or mechanical sounds, and apparently no human can make a sound frequency this low. And the show had an EVP specialist listen to the sound, and she said that it sounds like energy coming from the other side. And of course, she found it really fascinating that this sound was made immediately after Carrie asked the spirit to let them know that they were there. Yeah. As the filming continued, events in the house kind of got worse and worse. Terry was attacked more often and more violently, and Peter James was also attacked as well. He said that Sally at one point burned his face, and burning was apparently a theme with this ghost. Like, she would set things on fire. And I'm not kidding. Like, they said fires would start in the house and they would have zero origin or starting point. And this was actually confirmed by another woman who came forward who said she had lived in the house when she was younger. Remember, this was a really old home. It had seen a lot of residents. But this woman said that when she lived there with her family, they had tons of very creepy, unexplainable things happen to them. And one of these events was a fire that had started in her brother's bedroom. And that was the room that was now the Pickmans' nursery. The room that probably saw, like, the ghostliest activity. She said that a fire had once started on the wall. There was no electrical outlets or power supplies in that area, and this really weird fire with no origin just started, like in the middle of the wall. Yeah. So after the show finished, after they wrapped, unfortunately there wasn't really any resolution. Like, the Pickmans felt that they hadn't really helped at all. In fact, it seemed like the haunting had actually gotten worse. Almost like the crew and the filming had kind of stirred the pot and pissed the spirits off. And they eventually had a medium come in who said that they could cleanse the house and get rid of the spirits. And Deborah said that she didn't want her to get rid of Sally because she was so attached to her. So the medium attempted to cleanse the other spirits away, but it didn't work anyways. So this is like, it's not disturbing. No, it is disturbing. So I'm not going into any details here. But apparently, Tony reached a point where his mental health was really declining because of everything that had been going on. He believed this demon apparently still has some sort of attachment or pull to Tony. Tony woke up one night standing in front of the Sally house. He had literally sleep